Next item of business is a Stage 1 debate on motion 22121 in the name of Shirley-Anne Somerville on the Social Security Administration and Tribunal Membership Scotland Bill. Can I ask those members who wish to take part in the debate to press the request to speak buttons now? And I call on Shirley-Anne Somerville to speak to and move the motion. Cabinet Secretary, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I want to begin by thanking the stakeholders who have engaged constructively to inform and scrutinise the provisions within this bill, both with the Government and the Committee. I know these are challenging times, so their time is appreciated now more than ever. And I'd also like to thank the Social Security Committee members and clerks for their continued scrutiny of the bill and their forbearance with the virtual sessions. I am, of course, delighted that the committee has confirmed their support for the general principles in the bill in the Stage 1 report. Presiding Officer, this bill started before we knew what 2020 was going to bring us. We knew the bill was needed to make statutory offences in primary legislation for the Scottish Child Payment, and we took the opportunity to address other areas where we needed primary legislation. This is even more important now as we know that families are under pressure and that Scotland will feel the economic impacts of COVID-19. Therefore, the Scottish Child Payment will be a lifeline for many and have a significant positive impact on our efforts to tackle child poverty. That is why, when we knew we had to make changes to the Social Security Delivery Programme due to focusing on our response to the pandemic, it was clear that the Scottish Child Payment would remain a priority area, and we are working hard to introduce it as soon as possible. To do that, we need to have these statutory offences in place. Whilst we start from the premise that everyone may be entitled to support, we know that there may be attempts to defraud the Scottish social security system. This is the case for the Scottish Child Payment as it is for other benefits. And while the overall sum lost to benefit fraud is not as large as some would have us believe, we do have to take action where appropriate to protect the public purse and the benefits. Presiding Officer, let me now turn to the provisions of the bill and start with one of the recommendations of the committee. Section 53 of the 2018 Social Security Act places a duty on Scottish ministers to notify individuals of possible eligibility for other benefits payable by Social Security Scotland under Part 2 of the 2018 Act, if in the course of making a determination it appears that the individual may be eligible for other assistance. In the Social Security Committee's Stage 1 report, it was noted that this duty should extend to forms of devolved top-up assistance, and I welcome this recommendation and confirm I will bring forward an amendment on this at Stage 2. The bill also includes provisions on appointees to ensure a suitable mechanism for support is in place for some of our most vulnerable clients. These provisions set out a statutory framework for appointees, supported by guidance for Social Security Scotland staff. We have sought to strike a balance between prescriptive statutory safeguards and safeguards set out in decision-making processes and guidance. For example, the statutory safeguards for adults with capacity include the requirement for the client to consent to an appointment and the ability to withdraw consent. And for children, we will take into account, so far as is practical, the views of the child and the others in the child's life, including the child's parents, and the duty to review an appointment on request by a person with legal authority to act on behalf of a child. I have listened to stakeholders on the issue of the guidance in this area, and I have asked the Disability and Carers Benefits Expert Advisory Group and the Ill Health and Disability Benefits Stakeholder Reference Group to provide advice on our proposals. We will also engage with our experience panels over the summer. The committee has asked me to consider making that guidance statutory, and I will consider that ahead of Stage 2. And of course, our guidance will be published and accessible to clients, their appointees, prospective appointees and professional advisors. This will ensure transparency and offer confidence that we have an appropriate and rights-based system for dealing with difficult situations. This bill also provides powers to withhold information about an individual's health where that would be likely to cause serious harm to the recipient's physical or mental health, and it is important that Social Security Scotland can do so. Can I stress that we expect this to be very rare, and this will only happen where a medical professional has determined that the information should be withheld. In cases where we do withhold information from a client, we will offer the client the opportunity to have an appointee. Offering these clients an appointee simply provides another opportunity to safeguard their rights. The ability to withhold information where that information would be likely to cause serious harm to the recipient demonstrates our commitment to delivering a service with a person-centred approach at its core, and in which our overriding aim is to work in the best interests of the client. The Social Security Scotland Act 2018 allowed a registered medical practitioner to clinically determine whether an individual is terminally ill for the purposes of disability assistance. Since then, the Chief Medical Officer's guidance has been developed and undergone a consultation with healthcare professionals and stakeholders. During that, it became clear that people wanted registered nurses with the appropriate skills and interactions with a patient to provide this clinical judgment to. I have listened, and therefore this bill extends that responsibility to certify a person as terminally ill to registered nurses. We will establish clear criteria which a registered medical practitioner or a registered nurse must meet in order to make that judgment. They will be provided for in a combination of regulations and guidance. Presiding Officer, the bill also changes the 2014 Tribunal Scotland Act to allow for other types of judges to be temporarily authorised to sit in the first-tier tribunal for Scotland and the upper tribunal. This is needed because, as we continue to introduce new social security benefits, the business of the Social Security Chamber of the Scottish Tribunals will also increase. Currently, the judicial capacity of the Scottish Tribunals is insufficient to deal with the projected increase in business arising from the devolved social security, so this bill widens the current list to allow more types of judges to be temporarily authorised to sit in both these tribunals. The President of the Scottish Tribunals and Senior President of Tribunals of the Reserved Tribunal System are fully supportive of the provisions within the bill, and I anticipate that they will seek authorisation of Reserved Tribunal members who have experience of dealing with social security appeals. We have always viewed Scotland's social security system as an investment in people, and that is why it has been designed to meet the needs of people, and we want to ensure that it does work for them. Therefore, I have also listened very closely to the views of the Scottish Commission on Social Security and others who have recommended that the bill should include provisions providing for a power to suspend payments of assistance should be included in the bill, and as the committee knows, I have agreed to bring forward amendments to include a power to suspend payment of assistance in the amended 2018 Act, subject to there being broad stakeholder support for this action. This would help to ensure clients are protected from overpayments and resultant overpayment deductions from their assistance. This will also simplify stopping and restarting payment of assistance where clients enter certain types of accommodation, for example, residential care. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, I would like to reiterate a few key points: that this bill is necessary to continue the successful implementation of the 2018 Act, and also, importantly, to ensure we have in legislation the statutory offences for the Scottish Child Payment. I intend to bring forward Stage 2 amendments in relation to suspension of payments and the duty to inform individuals about possible eligibility for other forms of devolved assistance, as long as broad stakeholder support is in place. I thank the Social Security Committee again for supporting general principles of the bill and look forward to their continued scrutiny. I commend the general principles of the bill to Parliament and move the motion in my name.
Thank you very much, Cabinet Secretary. And before I call Bob Joris, I apologise to members for not moving. I clean forgot. You've got to stay in the seats that you're allocated to so you don't spread infection. So, silly me. I now call Bob Joris on behalf of the Social Security Committee. Convener, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. As convener of the Social Security Committee, I am pleased to speak in the debate this afternoon on the Social Security Administration and Tribunal Membership Scotland Bill. I thank the Cabinet Secretary for her written response this week to the committee's Stage 1 report, and I am grateful to my fellow committee members for their constructive approach during a shortened scrutiny process, particularly given the bill was introduced at the end of March as the nation was entering lockdown during the early days of COVID-19. Likewise, my gratitude to our key stakeholders who were still able to respond to the committee's call for views during such difficult times. The bill will extend, as we've heard, fraud provisions in Social Security Scotland Act 2018 to top-up benefits. The Scottish Child Payment will be a new top-up benefit to those in receipt of universal credit. It will be paid for by the Scottish Government and delivered by Social Security Scotland. It will see eligible households receive £10 per week per child and is estimated to deliver £180 million to the families of 410,000 children each year once fully rolled out. I would note that estimate was before the significant increase in UC claims, something the committee will no doubt monitor when conducting future budget scrutiny. With the sums of public money involved, I am confident that Parliament will agree that it is important this bill will ensure appropriate fraud protections are in place before the Scottish Child Payment commences. The committee is content with this, and none of our respondents raised any objections. I note that the first payments are now anticipated for early 2021, as opposed to Christmas 2020, due to the impact of COVID-19. If there is any prospect to deliver payments sooner than early 2021, we would very much welcome this as a committee. In line with all benefits, a claimant must report any change of circumstances which could affect their claim. A claimant might be confused about whether to notify DWP or Social Security Scotland about their change in circumstances. The committee would therefore be grateful for clarification that it would be sufficient to notify Social Security Scotland. The bill contains changes regarding appointees to collect social security benefits on behalf of a child or behalf of any adult who consents to. Most children will already have someone with that right to collect any benefits on a child's behalf, usually but not always a parent. However, for some children there is no one with formal parental rights. This bill puts in place foundations for a system of appointees. For adults there are already provisions in the 2018 Act for appointees for adults who lack capacity. This bill, however, introduces the ability for an adult with capacity, for whatever reason, to consent to having an appointee. This is a fundamentally new provision described by the Child Poverty Action Group as novel. CPAG and the Law Society for Scotland told the committee that the provision lacked clarity, pointing to an absence of any provision for challenging decisions on appointees or for resolving disputes. There is nothing on the face of the bill about how appointees will be made or how to ensure consent obtained from an adult is explicit, informed and freely given. The Law Society of Scotland and EHRC are concerned that the provisions as they stand do not comply with human rights requirements, something to reflect upon. The bill's policy memorandum explains that being able to have someone else to make a claim and receive benefits could be useful for claimants who have a diagnosis of a terminal illness. Some stakeholders were concerned, though, that putting an appointee in place could lead to delays in receiving benefits or force a discussion of a claimant's situation and risk abuse without the process to establish free consent for an individual. In her evidence to the committee, the Cabinet Secretary acknowledged some of these concerns and sought to reassure and confirmed the operational detail of the appointee system will be brought forward in guidance after consultation with stakeholders. The committee agrees the operational detail best sits in guidance. However, we want the bill to set out general safeguarding principles that will underpin that guidance. Perhaps providing for mechanisms to challenge appointee decisions, undertaking periodic reviews and resolving disputes. We also recommend, as the Cabinet Secretary made reference to, that guidance should be statutory, and we welcome that the Scottish Government is open to those suggestions. They will give them consideration. Linked to the provision of appointees is the proposal to allow information about a person's health to be withheld, where disclosure will be likely to cause serious harm to the physical or mental health of the claimant. The policy memorandum discusses this provision in the context of making appointees for people who are terminally ill, and Macmillan Cancer Support refers to some cases early on in universal credit rollout of people finding out that they have less than 6 months to live through their UC journal. Clearly, we would not want that to happen with Social Security Scotland. However, the bill's provisions are not limited to cases of terminal illness. Health information can be withheld in any circumstance where disclosing it would cause serious harm to a person's physical or mental health. Sam H would like to see a definition in the bill of serious harm to physical or mental health. Now, the committee understands the rationale for, in some cases, withholding information for a claimant where there has been a diagnosis of terminal illness. However, we are still interested to hear about the different circumstances in which information might be withheld, what the definition of serious harm to physical or mental illness would be, and how it is consistently going to be applied across the country. I will briefly note some of the other provisions within the bill our committee broadly welcomes. It will allow health professionals other than doctors to verify that a person is terminally ill for the purpose of fast-tracking their claim for disability payments. The professionals to be included will be set out in regulations, but it must include registered nurses. This was strongly supported. Some supported extending this further. For example, Parkinson's UK, Marie Curie and MND Scotland suggested some allied health professionals potentially. Now, the committee agrees with the Cabinet Secretary that the terminology we commit to in primary legislation must retain sufficient flexibility to respond to any future changes in health professionals. However, there are discussions still to be had on the details to be brought forward in draft regulations, and the committee looks forward to being involved in those discussions in due course. Finally, Presiding Officer, the bill will allow the temporary appointment of judges and former judges from other jurisdictions to Scotland's first tier and upper tribunals. The committee was content with these provisions, but we asked the Cabinet Secretary whether bringing judicial office holders over from a reserve system would be a temporary measure. We've had those reassurances today that it would be. After all, the Scottish social security system is being built on very different principles, underpinned by the Charter. The creation of a new devolved social security system presents an opportunity to do things differently. Presiding Officer, I will conclude my speech by saying, notwithstanding the committee's strong views on appointees and safeguarding measures, on behalf of the committee, let me place on record that we are content to support the general principles of the bill and look forward to engaging positively with the Scottish Government at stage 2.
Thank you very much, Convener. I now call Graham Simpson. Mr Simpson, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. This is a largely technical bill. I imagine we'll hear a series of contributions which are pretty similar to each other today. I expect we'll support the general principles of the bill as a Parliament, and there'll be not a single line in the press about it tomorrow. We could, in fact, just jump to the vote and be done with it, but that would be far too simple. So what's the bill for exactly? The bill has 4 main themes: appointees, top-up benefits, terminal illness and tribunals. On appointees, it would allow ministers to appoint a person to receive benefit payments on someone else's behalf if the claimant is a child, or if an adult, the claimant agrees to the appointment. On top-up benefits, it would allow regulations that create top-up benefits to include provisions on offences and investigations, and this would apply to the Scottish Child Payment due to start early next year. On terminal illness, it would allow medical professionals other than doctors to confirm that a person is terminally ill for the purpose of fast-tracking their benefit claim. The first benefit to which this would apply would be the child disability payment. This, I think, is an area that we'll want to look again at stage 2. And on tribunals, it would allow the temporary appointment of judges from other jurisdictions to sit on Scottish tribunals, including those dealing with Social Security Scotland benefits. The committee did its stage 1 work at some speed and held only 1 evidence session, which was done virtually. I have to say this is not ideal. It's no way to do legislation, and I hope we sort it out for stage 2. The Scottish Government had intended to launch 2 new benefits this year. Child disability payment had been due to start this summer, replacing child disability living allowance. The Scottish Child Payment had been due to start before Christmas, giving universal credit claimants an additional £10 a week, initially for each child in their family aged under 6. But these benefits can only start if changes are made to the Social Security Scotland Act 2018. And without the measures in this bill, it would not be possible to create an offence of fraud for the Scottish Child Payment unless that benefit was created using primary legislation. So you could easily argue that this bill is with us in order to fix deficiencies in the Social Security Act. If that had been done properly, this wouldn't be required. When the Cabinet Secretary first told us of the need for the bill, she said all stages would need to be complete before the end of this week. That was pre-COVID. On April the 1st, she told Parliament that the Scottish Child Payment would come in sometime early in 2021. She was not more specific than that, and she'll have to be at some point. She also said she hoped to introduce winter heating for families with a disabled child in winter 2020. She was not able to give a timetable for the start of other benefits, including the child disability payment. So there's a bit of a pattern here. I'd like to specifically focus on the introduction of appointees and those permitted to verify a terminal illness. The Equalities and Human Rights Commission was scathing in its criticism of the appointees' proposals. And they said, and I'll quote them, "We welcome the recognition that individuals with capacity may wish to have another person appointed to deal with their social security on their behalf. Also that the position of young people requires to be addressed. However, the appointment of a person to act on behalf of an individual has very significant consequences for the individual, and we're concerned about the apparent lack of appropriate procedures and necessary safeguards. They, of course, had more to say, and the Law Society of Scotland were also critical. So this is an area which I think has to be considered for stage 2. Now, turning to the other area where I think amendments may be required, and that is section 7, on who can verify that a person has a terminal illness. Jeremy Balfour will have more to say on this, so I'll keep my comments brief so as not to steal his thunder. Currently, under the 2018 Act, only a doctor can decide if somebody is terminally ill. The bill would extend this to other health professionals with particular training and experience. The skills and training required and the definition of appropriate healthcare professional will be set out in the regulations creating the disability benefits. These must include a registered nurse, but could also include other health professionals. And I do think it's worth considering if we should be more specific on the face of the bill. The proposal has received overwhelming support, but that should not prevent us from trying to improve it. It lacks clarity for me just now. So there's a little way to go on the bill. I think it can be improved, but we're happy to agree with the general principles of it at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr Simpson, I now call Mark Griffin. Mr Griffin, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Like my colleagues on committee, will of course be supporting the bill today. It's a short, technical bill which makes sensible adjustments to the framework of the 2018 Act to enhance the smooth running of the devolved benefits, particularly disability benefits, and the top-up power for Scottish Child Payment when they're introduced, hopefully sooner rather than later. I want to thank those who were able to give evidence to the committee, Deaf Scotland, the Alliance, Citizens Advice, amongst others, who gave evidence. We had Sam H and CPAG who gave virtual evidence, and we've had helpful briefings in the last couple of days from Marie Curie and Macmillan. I think it's still fair to say that scrutinising a bill in lockdown is more challenging, but all of those organisations gave helpful input. Likewise, the clerks and government officials who made this happen, adjusting their timetables and processes amid the pandemic, deserve our thanks too. The committee's report reflects the evidence that we heard and agrees with the principles of the bill. As the report says, aside from on appointees, those who gave evidence didn't object to the measures. The Cabinet Secretary was open and forthcoming in both her responses at committee and in the response to our report issued this week. In most areas, the Cabinet Secretary has further explained how the powers the Government is seeking might be used and explained where guidance will regulate those powers. Proposals to allow nurses and some allied health professionals to complete the BAS-RIS form for fast-track terminal illness applications has been widely welcomed by the likes of Marie Curie, M&D Scotland and Macmillan, who have been instrumental in working towards the new terminal illness system. I'm grateful that the Cabinet Secretary has said she's minded to include a provision in the bill for a statutory requirement to publish safeguarding guidance. There were concerns that the appointee system could be open to abuse, and I might suggest then that this offer is improved with a requirement that the guidance standards require the approval of the Parliament, for instance, in the same way as the advocacy standards are. And there remains some desire for clarity on the provisions to withhold information from someone in what's a complicated aspect of the bill. The committee has considered the logic of that carefully. We sought reassurance that if an adult is capable in the sense that they can manage their own affairs, why then might it be appropriate to withhold their own health information from them, and how, if they are capable, would disclosure lead to the serious harm that's claimed? Sam H has rightly sought further definition, but the Law Society of Scotland have questioned if this is consistent with a human rights-based approach. Pending broad stakeholder support, There will be mechanisms to suspend carer or disability benefits rather than stopping them, and the extension of the duty to inform about possible eligibility to the top-up benefits. But since the announcement of the Scottish Child Payment and its supporting analysis were published, a lot has changed. Because of the pandemic and the economic consequences of lockdown, the number of people claiming universal credit has leapt up substantially. It's for that reason I've written to the Cabinet Secretary today to consider further provisions at stage 2 to lock in provisions to maximise take-up of the child payment. Figures I obtained today show that nearly half of new applications for universal credit, 57,000, were made by claimants with children, and worse still, 3,500 of those applications were from families who had 3 or more children, and almost all will be subject to the 2-child limit. And though this bill is an administrative one, intended to be light on policy content, I hope provisions to set targets for the take-up of top-up benefits and review triggers should any target not be met might be considered. And I appreciate that my letter has only been sent today and that the Cabinet Secretary might not have had a chance to read it, but I would be grateful for discussion with the Cabinet Secretary over the summer ahead of stage 2. I'm in no doubt that not only has the number of families eligible for the child payment grown, but more families than ever are taking up the benefits they so desperately need. And that makes the success of the Scottish Child Payment more important than ever. These families will be desperately stretched right now, and while we don't have a clear picture of the numbers pushed into poverty, many are already suffering. And though families across Scotland will have made their claim for universal credit, they will still need to apply for the child payment when it comes round to applications opening if they want to boost their incomes. The Scottish Labour will support amendments which ensure committee recommendations are achieved, and if we can, Presiding Officer, in the current circumstances, do a little more to reaffirm the importance of securing widespread take-up of the Scottish Child Payment, I think we should take that opportunity. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Alison Johnson for around 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I too would like to begin by thanking all who gave evidence to the committee and helped in our deliberations. It doesn't seem so long ago that we passed the historic legislation setting up our new Scottish social security system. And it is a system that, in stark contrast to the one it partly has replaced, explicitly recognises the role that it can play in fostering the dignity and respect of everyone who needs help with their income. And in those 2 years, I welcome the fact that we've paid Best Start grant and Best Start foods to almost 100,000 Scots families, and that that's been done without capping the number of children those schemes can support. And having stood on a manifesto pledge to introduce better financial support for young carers, I'm particularly proud that almost 1,200 of them are now receiving the Young Carers Grant. And I note that one of the other founding principles of the bill is that the Scottish Government should continuously improve the Scottish social security system. And the bill before us today seeks to do that. Now, a particularly difficult issue we dealt with in the first bill was that of terminal illness. Some of the devolved benefits will often be paid to those who are terminally ill, and for people who are terminally ill, every day is even more precious. So we should be doing everything possible to ensure they get access to the social security help they need as soon as possible. And that being so, I very much welcome the proposal to allow a greater array of health professionals, including at least nurses, to certify terminal illness for the purposes of applying for devolved social security. As Hospice UK noted in its response to the committee's consultation on the bill, nurses are often the ones who know their patients best, so allowing them to confirm that someone has a terminal illness will allow them to access the special rules more easily. Now, the bill, as we've heard, extends the system of appointees from people without capacity to people with capacity and also children. Clearly, there will be some cases in which it is appropriate for someone to apply for a social security payment and have that paid to them on someone else's behalf. However, I do note the concerns expressed to the committee around safeguarding of this process. In the past, the system of appointees that operates at the UK level has proven flawed. For example, in 2018, a first-tier tribunal judge criticised the DWP for making Birmingham City Council an appointee of an attendance allowance recipient because the application had several very serious errors and omissions that hadn't been detected. And Citizens Advice Scotland have brought to our attention the case of a South of Scotland personal independence payment recipient with mental health conditions who was asked to leave the family home by their mother, also their appointee, and the DWP refused to stop paying PIP to the person's mother. So, a number of organisations have drawn attention to the need for a mechanism to allow the recipient to challenge the Scottish Minister's decision to create an appointee for them, for periodic reviews, and for a system of adjudicating between competing appointee claims. And I encourage the Cabinet Secretary to give these careful consideration. The bill empowers ministers to create offences in respect of fraudulently claimed Scottish benefit top-ups. In the absence of this, it wouldn't be possible to recover payments made as a result of fraud, and so it's welcome in that respect. However, as I've said previously in the Chamber, I hope the Scottish Government will tread carefully in its approach to tackling benefit fraud. While social security fraud is a very serious offence that should be dealt with accordingly, there's also clearly scope for genuine error. The benefit system can be incredibly complicated, and that should never be confused with fraud. And as Scottish top-ups are a new area of the benefit system with 2 levels of government involved, there's perhaps even more scope for honest mistakes on the part of applicants and recipients. Before closing, Green support calls to use the legislation to provide a way of temporarily suspending benefit payments whilst maintaining someone's eligibility. This would allow, for example, payment to be stopped temporarily if someone claiming a disability benefit with a care component was being looked after in a care home and then restarted when they returned to their own home. Now, that would preserve their eligibility and ensure passported benefits aren't lost, and it would prevent very unwelcome delay. The bill is a genuine and well-meaning attempt to improve our new social security system, and it is therefore welcome. But of course, as well as being efficient for any system to work properly, it has to deliver an adequate income to those in receipt. However, I think, as colleagues have agreed, there is still scope to amend the bill to address some of the concerns stakeholders have raised. Greens will support the general principles of the bill later today and look forward to making those improvements at stage 2 and 3. Thank you.
We move now to the open debate and speeches of 4 minutes, please. Keith Brown, followed by Brian Whittle.
Presiding Officer, I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak in support of this bill. My colleagues on the committee will be aware of my strong belief that we should always be working to improve access to entitlements. Also, that the process of accessing support should be made easier, not harder, and that social security is a fundamental building block of any civilised society. We know that all too often an entitlement is the only thing that stops a family going hungry, a home becoming cold, or the lights going out. That social security is recognised as a human right here in Scotland is not only welcome, it's right and it's just. Providing for the social security of its people must be the first and overriding priority of any government. And as the Cabinet Secretary said in their opening remarks, social security should rightly be seen as an investment and not a burden. Entitlements are instrumental in delivering on the principles of fairness and respect and in protecting the dignity of everyone in Scotland. We must be unwavering in our defence of them as a protection against poverty and also as a transformative tool. The committee has also discussed at various points the idea of a universal basic income, and that really is a wraparound social security system, but one which crucially has a huge economic impact. If you give people enough money so they can support themselves, they can feed themselves, they can heat their houses and pay for their rent, that provides that level of security and demand in the economy, which would help us with a people-led recovery such as we'd like to see coming out of the COVID crisis. But for too long, there's been a concerted effort by many to stigmatise those who are vulnerable and in need of our support. How many of us have stood in this chamber to highlight the way in which universal credit fundamentally fails our constituents, to highlight the way the system is designed to be complicated or to be impenetrable to those who need it most. Also how it punishes claimants, pushing into spirals of debt and rent arrears and forces them to food banks. It's a system, it seems to me, designed to see the most vulnerable in our communities as undeserving, and that actually put up barriers in their way to access the meagre support it offers. So I welcome the bill today, which therefore seeks to make accessing entitlements easier, among a number of other measures, and I'll consider some of these. First of all, it's clear that there remain gaps in existing legislation that would result in some children entitled to support missing out. Allowing appointees to act on behalf of children where they have no adult with legal authority is reasonable, legitimate and right. Similarly, there are circumstances where it's appropriate for adults with capacity, where they agree, to have somebody act on their behalf. The creation of this process in circumstances where someone is terminally ill will provide support in what is undeniably an extremely difficult time. And support for people who are terminally ill is a complex and sensitive matter, as we've heard. There are many competing pressures and a multitude of decisions that those who are ill and their loved ones must navigate. I do have some concerns, however, over the current lack of a review mechanism for the appointees, an issue that was raised by our Stage 1 report. While it's right that we work to improve ease of access to support, we must not sacrifice safeguarding for vulnerable people at the same time. And I'm reminded of a case which I raised during the committee of a young woman in the west of Scotland who was murdered by two adults who then claimed her benefits for, I think, around 20 years. Forgive me if the details aren't exactly right. And I think it's crucial that we avoid a situation like that being able to be repeated. So it seems reasonable to me that we should introduce a periodic review of appointees in order to ensure the system has not been taken advantage of. I realise, of course, that such instances may be very few in nature, but the impact on those affected is huge. I note that the Scottish Government has responded on this point and they'll introduce a statutory duty to publish guidance, and I was grateful for that, following a consultative period. And I appreciate there may be a number of ways of achieving the same, but the Government will understand that there is a difference between guidance setting out a review procedure and having a statutory duty to review appointments regularly. Apart from anything else, it sends out a very powerful message that this kind of corruption of the system will not be tolerated. I think this is an issue of importance, and I'll continue to seek assurances from the Government on this to ensure that rights are properly safeguarded. In wrapping up, Presiding Officer, I'm pleased to support this bill, which makes necessary and positive changes to our social security system. Thank you.
Brian Whittle, followed by Claire Adamson.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer, and I'm pleased to be able to speak in this Stage 1 debate. I think it's already been pointed out by members. I think this bill is quite a technical bill, and probably as such will not get the attention that it may deserve. However, as we make changes to these kinds of laws, I think it's always worth mentioning that we are dealing with significant changes to people's lives. So I would like to focus what short time I have, Deputy Presiding Officer, on part of the bill pertinent to a young man that I know, in fact, I coach, and that would be the Section 1 of this bill, the appointees. And this young man's foster parents have looked after him for 9 years, and I think that I'd like to say I think they're truly remarkable, and I have nothing but admiration for the job they have done in bringing him and his sister up. They introduced him to athletics, and he's become a really excellent athlete, winning a bronze medal at European Championships and qualifying for the World Championships, with a goal next year to go to the Paralympics. Now, this young man and his sister have fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, but if you met him, you would probably decide that he was an enthusiastic young man, always smiling and always complaining, as it happens, about training. So I think sport actually is very important to someone with these kind of conditions because it introduces that sense of order and commitment. But during the last 9 years, his foster parents have done an incredible job, so much so that he's now studying at college and doing exceptionally well. He's moved out of the family home and is living in a shared flat, and he can cook and clean, do all the household chores. I'm particularly bad at, I have to say. So I can see how an assessment for benefits here would be particularly problematic. However, his ability to handle money is in question, and when he asked if his foster mother could collect and look after his finances, this was turned down. He is smart enough to recognise he has a weakness there, but the system couldn't accommodate his request. And the net result is not having to deal with that level of finance before. He has struggled. One of the first things he did, for example, was to go out and buy himself a pair of £200 trainers, which certainly doesn't constitute good financial planning. I think what this highlights to me is the need for the law to adapt to people in this kind of circumstance. In giving people as much freedom to live their lives as possible, we also must be able to recognise that in certain circumstances there may be limitations that have to be taken into account. That's why I think that Section 1 of the bill, to me, is going along in the right lines. I think that provision to appoint a person to receive benefits on someone else's behalf if the claimant agrees to that appointment,
and also the fact that it enables an adult without parental rights, which actually is this particular instance, to manage the child's benefit system in those circumstances. But I think where I would like to point out where the bill states it would allow ministers to terminate an appointment at any time and must do if the consent is withdrawn. Now, I think that needs a bit more careful consideration. Decisions made in that kind of fit of pique may not always necessarily be in the best interest of the benefit recipient in some instances, which I think is a thought here probably to bring into the next stage of the bill. Another thing that I don't quite understand is where it says it allows ministers to appoint. I'm not sure if that's the right terminology. I think there's much to consider to put the correct checks and balances in place, as already been mentioned by a few in the chamber. But for me, Deputy Presiding Officer, I would agree that this bill is definitely going in the right direction of travel, and as I said, we will be supporting this at this time. Deputy Presiding Officer.
Claire Adamson, followed by Gordon Lyndhurst.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I'm not a member of the Social Security Committee, but as a former convener, I do take an interest in the continuing work of the committee, and I want to thank the convener and the members of the committee for their work on the Stage 1 report. It's already been mentioned that this happened during the COVID crisis, when we were all getting used to a new way of working, and it was not without its challenges, but I think they have come to a very good conclusion in their Stage 1 report. I have to say it did have an impact on me too, because I'm not a committee member. My first port of call was to look back at the evidence session, and it's, I'm afraid, not available through technical difficulties, so I had to resort to the OR. So it's an absolute pleasure to see so many of the committee members speaking today, both virtually and in the chamber this afternoon. And it's something that, certainly in my time as the committee, that aspect of fairness, dignity and respect was absolutely the heart of what we were doing in developing the social security system in Scotland. And it's really good to see some positive additional work in that area going forward, still with those principles at the very heart of what is happening. In the issue of appointees, and I appreciate I've heard a few concerns about how that might be handled and how the permanency of such an arrangement might be handled, and that it should be done with diligence. It is an absolutely important area, and it is unfortunate that there are wicked people who might have an intent to abuse this situation, but it is absolutely right that we are able to give adults with capacity the choice to be able to appoint someone to receive their benefits on their behalf. And it's also very considered in the bill, the issue around the dignity of people to whom revealing a diagnosis may have a detrimental impact on their health. And I think this is a really delicate issue, but from the contributions I've heard this afternoon, I think all on the committee appreciate just how delicate that situation can be. But I do think that when it's in the minds of the clinicians that this is the right thing to do for someone, that we should be able to build into the system those safeguards to ensure that something is not revealed that could be detrimental to someone. I'm also very mindful of the sensitivities around the issues of terminal diagnosis. It was something that when we were developing the social security system probably caused most of my concern about actually getting this right for people, because we were presented with a system from the UK that depended on a 6-month accuracy of a diagnosis of life expectancy, which is totally unrealistic, cruel, and would have been devastating to claimants who in the last months or weeks of their lives could have seen benefits being cut because of this restrictive rule. So I'm very happy that we didn't embed that into our system, and what's gone further in this bill this afternoon is to actually ensure that that terminal diagnosis is available as early as possible, to ensure that the right support is there for people at the most difficult points in their lives. And I know that many MS nurses, MND nurses, Macmillan cancer nurses will know much more about their patients than perhaps a doctor would, and are the best people to be able to maybe just take that decision to switch and let the patients know, to ensure that those fast-track benefits get to people at the very most difficult times in their lives. So I thank the committee for their work. I think these are 5 proposals that will strengthen our social security system going forward, and I look forward to seeing the development at stage 2. Thank you.
The last of the open debate contributions is from Gordon Lyndhurst.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. This bill would appear to significantly increase the workload for the Scottish Courts and Tribunal Service, or at least has the potential to, in relation to dealing with devolved social security. I do welcome the measures to make more robust scrutiny and justice mechanisms for the devolved benefits. For example, the creation of statutory fraud offences in relating to Section 79 of the 2018 Act, in addition to allowing ministers to make provision in regulations for the investigation of allegations. But the upshot of these measures, as I've said, is likely to be a volume of additional cases, and it is vital, as the Law Society of Scotland noted in its written evidence, that the temporary appointment of other types of judge to sit on these tribunals should be just that, temporary only. The only realistic and long-term solution is permanent provision, support and resourcing for those at tribunal level with expertise in social security matters. Otherwise, we are liable to end up with the consequences of potentially bad decisions doing the system down. So the current proposal should perhaps even be time limited, and it might even be appropriate for something of that nature to be amended into the legislation at stage 2. Moving on to the provisions made for recognition of individuals capable of diagnosing a terminal illness, as outlined in Section 7 of the bill, I think this is welcome and likely the correct decision to expand the definition to an appropriate healthcare professional to speed up the process of, for example, disability assistance claims. After the passing of the 2018 Act, the consultation carried out to develop guidance for the Chief Medical Officer to complement that Act found that the majority of DS 1500s used by the DWP to certify terminal illness were in fact completed by nurses. Therefore, as a measure to bring an oversight of the previous Act into line with UK practice at the DWP level, this is to be welcomed. In conclusion, the regulations following from the legislation which set out the professional criteria for appropriate healthcare professionals needs to be specific, rigorous and of a high quality. That despite the government's apparent reluctance to clarify in primary legislation which particular job titles would qualify. So I look with anticipation to stage 2 proceedings and greater clarification in these areas. The Scottish Government's responsibility for social security payments as part of the devolution settlement is significant and important, and it needs to be carried out in a thoroughly careful and cautious fashion. Thank you.
We now move to the closing speeches, and I call on Pauline McNeill, please, for about 6 minutes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. When I received a call from the Cabinet Secretary's office for an urgent meeting on the Social Security Bill, I was at the beginning surprised that we had so many omissions from the Social Security Act. But the committee and Bob Doris attended the meeting too, was only too willing to get on with the job which we are really set up to do, which is to make sure that all the provisions in the Social Security Act are as they should be and fit for purpose. It's a short bill, as has been said, with 5 specific provisions. And as other members have done, I'd like to add my thanks to the many organisations who gave evidence, had observations to make, and all those who worked on the bill, officials and so on. And it's quite clear that the bill does need further amendment. It is an administrative bill. Mark Griffin and Bob Doris have said quite clearly that there is much work to be done, particularly urging the Scottish Government to, whenever it is practically possible, to bring forward the child payment that is so much needed. So the issue of terminally ill patients has been a campaign issue for organisations like MND Scotland and Marie Curie, and they never gave up on completing their work on finding a solution to fast-tracking benefits for terminally ill patients. And now this bill seeks to expand the scope of health professionals able to sign off on a terminally ill patient and allow quicker decisions. Between the years of 2013 and 2018, the DWP refused nearly 8,000 claims, and those 8,000 claims, those people died within 6 months, and that illustrates how necessary these provisions are. The duty to inform, that the Cabinet Secretary has already said that she will bring forward amendments in stage 2. I'd like to say I really do welcome this particular commitment, Cabinet Secretary, and Mark Griffin has also spoken to this. It is critical of the ethos behind the Social Security Act that we have all agreed on, that the duty to maximise uptake, and if we see that at stage 2, I think that will be wholeheartedly welcomed, certainly by the Labour Party. But I still want to see at some stage more progress on other ways to uptake benefits like automation, which I know we've been in discussion about. On the Scottish Child Payment, we do need to get that cash in the pockets of families. Many anti-poverty organisations have already set out to the Social Security Committee other ways of bringing perhaps a lump sum payment equivalent to a proposed child payment, as we're likely to see, would hope to see an uptake, and as a suggested target of 85% when we can undertake that work. But as other members have said, one of the most significant areas requiring amending, I think probably every member mentioned this, is the provisions in Part 1, and that is the ability to challenge an appointee in order to prevent deception and exploitation. We've heard cases from Brian Whittle and Keith Brown, Alison Johnson. If you wanted convincing, certainly listening to those speeches, it's quite clear that we do need to get those provisions right. I want to conclude on 2 major points. I'd like to firstly agree with Gordon on the question of temporary appointment of judges. I've raised this throughout the passage of the whole of the bill in relation to the need for all of the judges within the system to be able to have clear training and attached to the ethos behind the Social Security Act, is really where I'm coming from. So simply extending the franchise means that we can deal with the workload, and I totally accept that that has to be done. Judges that have an expertise, but they have an expertise from a UK-wide system that has a different ethos, and that is my concern, is that I do think at some point there needs to be proposals to ensure that all of the judges that are making decisions around social security and making those decisions from the standpoint of the ethos behind our Social Security Act, which we all agree should do something different. Perhaps Gordon Lyndhurst was also referring to a case, I think it's quite old now, the temporary appointment of judges is always a risky one, and it has led to problems in the past where the temporary nature of it goes on for so long it's not really temporary any longer and may not be seen as independent. Lastly, I just want to use this opportunity to say that I do think in the future we need to keep an eye on social security reform. The need for anti-poverty measures has probably never been greater. The Joseph Rowntree Foundation and Save the Children in their briefing mentioned the fact that 70% of the families that they've surveyed have taken out some loan or other in order to get themselves through the pandemic and the crisis we face. So I think that, in closing, Presiding Officer, I think it's important to finish the work, to take the passage of this bill through to the end of this Parliament to ensure that it is signed by the end of this parliamentary term, but also to think ahead as to how our social security will be fit for purpose, given the last 3 months of people's lives has changed a little bit. And whilst we've got solid commitments, which we are behind, the child payment and many of the other things that the Scottish Government have done, I think we also need to be flexible and assess the needs going forward as to what the nation needs from a social security system. Thank you.
I now call Jeremy Balfour for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. And can I thank all members for their contribution so from this debate. I think it has been a helpful debate. As we have said, this bill is quite technical, but there are policy changes which are welcome as well. Now, none of us would want to be in the place that we are today. We have seen a delay, as Graham Simpson has pointed out, in the delivery of benefits here in Scotland. Some of those are due to the crisis we are going through at the present, but also the Scottish Government timetable has lapsed and has fallen in regard to that. And if it wasn't for DWP picking it up, then many people in Scotland wouldn't be getting the benefits that they rightly deserve today. I would like to focus in on two areas, which I think most members have picked up on already. Firstly, in regard to appointees, I agree with, I think, all the speakers so far, but we do need to look at this and make sure that the appropriate safeguards are put in place. Having spoken to Epilepsy Scotland, I know it's not just those who maybe have a severe health condition or mental health condition. It can be a much more nuanced area in regard to that. I am slightly concerned that the Scottish Government want to put so much into guidance. As Bob Dollis pointed out at the Justice Committee yesterday in his contribution, guidance is guidance, it's not law. And so I do think we need to look again at what is in the bill, and we need to strengthen that to make sure that people are not manipulated and are not being used by third parties in a way that would not be acceptable. The second area I would like to cover, Deputy Presiding Officer, is that in regard to the provisions around terminal illness. As someone who campaigned when the original bill was going through on this, and I think we have made great progress, and I welcome the direction that the government is going in regard to opening up who can fill out the forms. We've had really helpful submissions from Macmillan and from Marie Curie and MND Scotland. And it's interesting, in the Marie Curie MND briefing paper that we received, and from Marie Curie and MND Scotland. And it's interesting, in the Marie Curie MND briefing paper that we received, one of the things that they pointed to make, it probably wouldn't be appropriate for every nurse in Scotland to complete this form. And I think I've already heard that some nurses are concerned that they would be expected to fill this out as part of their day-to-day working. And I think within the bill, we may have to look at making sure that that mandatory training is within the statute, so that nurses would be protected, and also those that are filling out the form would be able to do it in an appropriate way. So I think that, as Graham Simpson has said, is something we may need to come back to at stage 2. I think my colleague Gordon Lyndhurst raised some interesting points about tribunal judges and the temporary appointment. As a former tribunal member who worked with DWP, I am aware of the benefits of that, but I'm also aware that there will be required future training on how to apply the new Social Security Act here in Scotland. I, in conclusion, Deputy Presiding Officer, would also want to thank the clerks of the committee for all the work that they did in quite difficult circumstances. I think this bill will tidy things up, will take us forward to the next stage, but I also think it will need some amendments at stage 2 and stage 3 to make sure that the people of Scotland get the best social security system that they can expect. Thank you very much.
I now call on the Cabinet Secretary to wind up the debate. If you could take us to just before decision time, which is 4:30, please. I
shall try my best, Presiding Officer. Can I begin by thanking the members for their very constructive contributions today. I've listened very carefully to their critique and suggestions for how this bill can be improved, and I look forward to working with them both in committee and indeed bilaterally to improve on what we have today. But I do think, as members have pointed out, this is a technical bill, but a very important bill. The obvious example of that is that we simply cannot move forward with the delivery of the Scottish Child Payment, which is of course a key component of our efforts to deliver child poverty and which we do want implemented as soon as possible, but we can't do that without the appropriate tools in place to address instances of fraud. And I'm pleased that the Parliament does recognise that and seem to support that principle. I would like to very much, however, concur with Alison Johnson's point about the importance of recognising the difference between honest mistake, genuine error and fraud. They are two very, very different aspects. The agency itself treats these as very, very different aspects, indeed by having different teams to look in them. And we should never, ever treat someone that's made an honest mistake as someone who has been fraudulent. As I say, they are exceptionally different. I'm also pleased to say that we will, as members have said, bring forward an amendment at stage 2 to ensure the duty under section 53 of the 2018 Act is extended to include forms of devolved top-up assistance. I suppose the area where members have spent the most time this afternoon is around the issue around appointees. I don't think there were many contributions that didn't bring that issue up, and many indeed spoke about the issues that were raised at committee by those who gave written and oral evidence. So I want to absolutely reaffirm my commitment to deliver an appointee process that's fit for purpose, that's informed by stakeholder engagement and is consistent with our rights-based approach to that. So I absolutely acknowledge that there is a desire to place more detail on a statutory footing, particularly around mechanisms to challenge or review the need for appointee, rather than leaving this to guidance. I do believe that guidance allows us to be more responsive to the needs of clients. We can readily incorporate best practice, for example, that way, and we can look to improve the process as required in a way that statutory revisions would not allow. But I've listened very carefully to what's been said today and indeed in the committee evidence session to have an eye on how we can improve that balance as we move forward. And I look forward to working with committee members to do just that. I think our aim is to have exactly the same thing when it comes to this. The guidance will ensure that where an appointment needs to be reviewed or there is a dispute, Social Security Scotland staff will act fairly, they'll act sensitively, in a way that takes into account the views of the client and, for children, the views of their parents and other responsible for the care of that child. In developing this guidance, we will engage with stakeholders to ensure that this process works for clients, for appointees, and absolutely importantly has that appropriate safeguarding in place built in at every step, because whether it's the example of the tragic case that Keith Brown brought up or some of the other aspects that members have brought up, it absolutely demonstrates why we need to get that right. So I give the reassurance again today that we'll continue the work over the summer with the Disability Carers Benefit Expert Advisory Group, our experienced panels and stakeholders to understand how we can strike that balance between prescriptive statutory safeguards and safeguards that will be set out in decision-making processes and guidance. In Graham Simpson's contribution and Jeremy Balfour's, indeed, there was a discussion around the timetable for how we hope to pass this bill and indeed how we hope to move forward with other benefit payments this year. Graham Simpson is quite right. We did hope and were on track to deliver the child disability payment this summer and on track to open up the Scottish Child Payment indeed earlier than our public announcements had said. That hasn't been possible because of COVID-19, and the changes to the timetable have been strictly because of COVID-19. But we do need still to pass this bill, I hope as quickly as possible, to allow us to deliver the Scottish Child Payment as quickly as possible. Graham Simpson asked about the timings for the Scottish Child Payment, and that is very much dependent on when the agency can recruit staff. I'm afraid I do not have a crystal ball for what will happen over the next couple of months, but he has my absolute reassurance that the agency and I are very keen to get going on that as soon as it's safe and within guidance for the agency to do so. Mr Simpson will also be interested to know that only this morning I had a very constructive joint ministerial working group with the Scotland Office and DWP ministers where we discussed the joint programme, that is the devolution of social security to Scotland, including the child winter heating allowance, and we are looking at replanning work that is ongoing that needs to work with what is happening within the DWP and the Scottish Government, because we are both departments working under pressure and circumstances from COVID-19, and that work is going on very constructively between both governments. Mark Griffin did... yes.
Graham Simpson.
Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for taking an intervention. I'm trying to help her to spin this out a little bit. I appreciate the difficulties with the staffing in Social Security Scotland, but just want to put on the record that from what I've heard, they've been doing an excellent job, and you've done really well in recruiting so many people under the current circumstances. Could I just make a general plea that over the summer the Cabinet Secretary engages with myself and others on any potential amendments, and that will smooth the way at stage 2, particularly if we're having to do it virtually. I think that would really help. Thank you.
Cabinet Secretary.
I'm grateful to Mr Simpson for recognising the hard work of the Social Security Scotland staff, including their new recruits who have been brought in remotely to work there, and absolutely give my commitment to work with him and with others across the chamber over the short summer recess we are having. Which brings me nicely to the letter which Mark Griffin mentioned in his remarks. He'll forgive me, it came in not long before I came down to the chamber for the debate, but I have had a chance to look at it. I think his wish and my wish to improve the take-up of devolved benefits is shared. The question is how. And I would suggest to him that I think the invite to apply that the Social Security Scotland will be doing to ensure that everyone, including those that's new onto universal credit, will get an invite to apply for devolved benefits is a direct way where we can deal and encourage people to sign up for what Social Security Scotland is responsible for. Both his letter and Pauline McNeill mentioned automated payments. Pauline McNeill will know I am very keen to look at this and see how we can develop it. It's not possible for the introduction of the first payments for Scottish Child Payment because of the speed that we are delivering Scottish Child Payment, but it has been something that I've already committed to looking to see what we could do. As I say, it is something which I'm very personally committed to. Pauline McNeill and another member talked about the training of judges. I would of course stress this is not a matter for the Scottish Government, as the independence of the judiciary is exceptionally important. It's a matter for the Judicial Institute, but if the committee members wish to take that up further, it is perhaps an issue for committee rather than definitely not government instruction towards the judiciary. But I absolutely recognise Pauline McNeill's long-going concerns over this issue and the importance of the ethos of Social Security Scotland. Bob Doris and others spoke about the disclosure of harmful information. This is a very, very difficult issue. I am clear it is justifiable to withhold information which a medical professional has already determined should be withheld because it's deemed necessary to prevent serious harm to an individual, and that in doing so we have to ensure the clients are not disadvantaged in accessing disability assistance. But it is for the medical professional to decide this and not for the agency. I would never want to get into a place where the agency second guesses what's happening and the decisions of a medical professional. Other members spoke about the importance of diagnosing terminal illness for disability assistance purposes correct, and it is something again which, as Graham Simpson has alluded to, he's not entirely convinced yet by my argument and the balance we've got on that right, and I've already got it noted down that it would be a discussion for over the summer, so he shall certainly be hearing from me on that aspect as well. Presiding Officer, this is a technical bill, but as I said at the start, it's an important bill. We have actively engaged with stakeholders and we will continue to do so over the summer because I recognise we do have improvements to make, but I would like to thank the Social Security Committee for their support of the general principles of the bill, and I hope that Parliament can unite in passing this at stage 1 today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cabinet Secretary. That concludes our Stage 1 debate on the Social Security Administration and Tribunal Membership Scotland Bill. The next item is consideration of motion 21907 in the name of Kate Forbes on the Social Security Administration and Tribunal Membership Scotland Bill Financial Resolution. Could I call on Ben McPherson to move this motion? Thank you very much. The next item is consideration of business motion 22128 in the name of Graham Day on behalf of the Bureau setting out a business programme. Could I call on the Minister for Parliamentary Business to move this motion?
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much. And no member has asked to speak on this motion. Therefore, the question is that motion 22128 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. Thank you. The next item is consideration of business motion 22129, also in the name of Graham Day on behalf of the Bureau, on the Stage 1 timetable for a bill. Could I call on Graham Day to move this motion?
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much. Again, no member has indicated they wish to speak on the motion. The question, therefore, is that motion 22129 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. The next item is consideration of 9 Parliamentary Bureau motions. Could I call on Graham Day on behalf of the Bureau to move motions 22130 and 22131 on designation of lead committees, and 22132, 133, 134, 135, 136, 137 and 22143 on approval of SSIs.
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much. The next item is consideration of an SSI. Could I call on Graham Day to move motion 22120?
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much. So now I'm minded to accept a motion without notice to bring forward decision time to now. Again, could I invite the Minister for Parliamentary Business to do so?
Moved with pleasure, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much. So the question is that decision time be brought forward to now. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. So the first question at decision time is that motion 22121 in the name of Shirley Ann Somerville on the Social Security Administration and Tribunal Membership Scotland Bill at Stage 1 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. The second question is that motion 21907 in the name of Kate Forbes on the financial resolution for the Social Security Administration Bill be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. I propose to ask a single question on 9 Parliamentary Bureau motions. Does anyone object? No. The question is that motions 22130 to 22137 and 22143 in the name of Graham Day on behalf of the Bureau be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. And the final question is that motion 22120 in the name of Jean Freeman on approval of an SSI be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed indeed. So members, we will meet again here on the 9th of July in a hybrid session. However, there will be virtual questions available every Thursday. There will be a decision sent out on Monday night what the topic will be for virtual questions next Thursday. Until then, I close this meeting and enjoy recess if you can.